certainly these are what you would call demons. In fact, the word is interchangeable with the term demon by Mark. The spirit of the bastards, as they're called in the Dead Sea Scrolls, or the unclean spirit, New Testament, and Enoch and Jubilees. Then, of course, you got someone like Josephus who says that no, these are spirit beings that are spirits of the dead. I guess you could say they're the dead Nephilim. But, of course, I'm going to throw a monkey wrench into that when we get into the Old Testament.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Buried Bible Podcast. I'm the curious everyday layman, Keegan Walls, here with Dr. Scholar Mark Chavalas. Mark, how are you?
Just great. Good to be with you, as usual.
Yeah, been a couple days, so I've missed you dearly. Have you missed me as much as I've missed you?
Maybe.
He's missed me more. His wife texted me saying he's crying himself to sleep. You need to come back. It's been a couple days. But no, we're excited to dive in. We're staying on the topic of demons. We want to get right to it and look at and kind of answer, well, I'm sure we'll touch on some other things, but really look at the question of what is a demon? Where do they come from? Who are they? What are they? And so we'll explore all those things and try to wrap up some things all on that question. What is a demon? And then looking at some different texts to help us understand that. So, Mark, I'll pass it over to you, and let's dive in.
Well, spoiler alert, as with every other topic we've done, when you start looking at documents, it gives you a greater understanding of the context, but it doesn't necessarily give you a concrete answer, and this is going to be no different. So maybe I'll start off by giving you two resources, one of which I might have already shown you before, but and of course, it's not actually a popular book, although it's been used for the popular audience. And of course, that's Mike Heiser's book on demons. And since I, of course, really always have liked Mike Heiser's works, this is really, I think, a pretty sober analysis of things. And so he's got loads and loads of secondary resources and primary source materials in it. And so I think it'll be very useful for someone who wants to get started on the topic. Although as usual with Mike's works, they're actually pretty dense. It's not none of his works are just easy reads. The other one is sort of a dictionary work, and it's a bit uneven, but it really is a great resource if you're into stuff like this. This is Carol Vandertoorn and Bob Becking and a few others, Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible. Very, very big. I think you actually can get this thing on a PDF file if you work a little hard and just look around and Google or however you
That's a big PDF.
Yes, well, it is, and so it might gum up your computer depending on the things. But in fact, seminary students, this came out about 25 years ago, so it's not brand new. But it's a really, really great and detailed resource. It's very academic, somewhat liberal in many cases, and so you're not always going to be in complete agreement with things, but it really is the best resource out there. Seminary students know this as DDD, by the way, and so, but it's something that I think is accessible to the populace. Hold on, I'm going to put these down on the ground for the moment. Now, as usual, I want to look at documents because I think if you ask someone, even in the New Testament era, I've just got on this planet recently, so what are these demons that you're talking about? Because, of course, they would be a little shocked if you would even ask that question. Where do they come from, and are they all spirit beings? Are they some spirit beings? Are they bad spirit beings, or etc.? And, I have to tell you is that if you ask that question of the Bible, whether it's the Old or New Testament, as with many of the questions that we're having, the answer is that they're not giving you the answer. In other words, that's not a question that the Bible is trying to answer for you. And that's probably in many respects why we have intertestamental literature that is attempting to answer some of these questions about demons. In the ancient Greek world, the term demon, I might have already brought this up before, but let me just repeat it, because chances are some of you might not have looked at any of the previous podcasts. Please do, but because we try to build on them. But, in ancient Greece, the term demon was, I suppose you could say, some sort of secondary spirit being that's not, it's a heavenly being. When I say heavenly, it's outside the realm of the earth, and so they're not necessarily always in heaven. They could be in the underworld or even on earth, but they're not from the natural world. And some of them are good and some of them are bad. But it's also a term, by the way, that was used for the classical Greeks to talk about something impersonal, like chance. So, for example, when the Athenians would vote, if they wanted to allow something that was sort of extra human to make the decision, kind of like, if you and I don't know, there's a bunch of us together and we want to choose which guy is going to, go and do the hard thing. And I don't know what it would be, but, maybe we would draw straws or pull a name out of a hat or whatever. And of course, think about it. What are we doing when we're doing that? We're allowing sort of impersonal chance to make a decision on it. And of course, you could make a joke about that, but as a Christian, we're thinking, yeah, that's just an impersonal natural force, and we're just letting that decide. In the ancient Greeks, that was a real force. It was impersonal, but they would actually saying they were voting by daimon, by demon. When Socrates, by the way, is asked how he knows certain things that are right and certain things that are wrong, he said, "I consult my demon." And of course, they got upset. Has this demon been registered by the state? And it looks as if Socrates is probably talking about something that eventually, in the Western world, becomes conscience. It'd be like you saying, "Well, I'll consult my little Jiminy Cricket on my shoulder to do this or to that." And so the term had a really wide, syntactic range to it. And so you, like most words, by the way, you have to look at it in context. So when you come to the Jewish world, they're trying to find a word in Greek, because they're, of course, writing either in the Septuagint or in the New Testament, or many of the Jewish writings, of course, that are intertestamental are written in Greek, for two reasons. One is because there are so many Hellenistic Jews that are more comfortable with Greek now. And secondly, they're writing for perhaps a non-Greek audience. Josephus certainly is. And so they got to find a word to describe the myriad of spirit beings that are, I suppose you can say, not in the upper echelon of spirit beings. And the term that is used is demon. And usually, and of course, if you're a Jew, any spirit being that is outside of God himself, any spirit being has the potential of being evil. And so, of course, we'll use the term angels for the good ones. And for the rest of them who are sort of inherently evil, we use the term demon. But this is in the intertestamental literature. When we get to the Old Testament a little bit later, even in this, probably not in this podcast, we're going to find out that it gets pretty confusing, because they're not thinking about collecting their thoughts and creating a taxonomy of these spirit beings. They're just aware of them. And so we're the ones who have the problem, because we're asking, well, what are they? Are they good? Are they bad? Etc. What does it mean to have it, for Saul to have it, an evil spirit come to bother him? Because it says it was from God. That sounds pretty troubling to me. What about the lying spirit in 1 Kings 22? We'll be discussing them. And as usual, I'll try to give you some insight about what's going on, but I probably won't come to a final conclusion as to exactly what it is. Can a demon be someone that is it a spirit from somebody who died? We'd call them ghosts, of course. The taxonomy shows that we might say that they seem to be sloppy in how they describe things, but those things could potentially be demons. They're certainly, are malevolent beings. In Mesopotamia, they are. I'm going to have to go there too. Finally, I'll get comfortable when I get back there. So let me start by looking at a couple texts in the intertestamental period. The first of which I've already brought up pretty extensively when we talked about, Genesis 6 and the Nephilim and all that other stuff, and that's First Enoch. And many of you out there who have read all of Mike Heiser's materials, you know that he develops this in a very detailed way. I'm not planning to do that, but I am planning to look at it. And I think I've told you before, whenever I would look at stuff in Mike's book, I would vacate his book and go to the source that he talked about and forget about, his book until I wanted to come back to it. And so I was always going back and forth. Oh, that's great, Mike. That's interesting that you brought that up. Oh, that scholar. All right, let me go find out, did you evaluate him correctly? And by the way, about 99 times out of 100, he was correct. And I know that somebody's out there saying, well, when was he wrong? He's a human being. He might have been wrong once. So let me go to First Enoch, and I without providing a context to it, because of course Enoch is having this revelation according to the tradition of the work, and mind you, I'll have to repeat it. First Enoch is a really, really important book, a really interesting book. It was even taken as canonical by the Ethiopic Church, but the rest of Christendom never accepted it as canon. They considered it a book that was useful and important, but not authoritative. And that's really what canonical means. And yes, it's quoted by 2 Peter and Jude, which does not make it canonical. It doesn't make it authoritative. It just makes it something that was useful to have a quote, in the same way that if I quote Shakespeare or something while I'm giving a sermon, that doesn't heighten Shakespeare up to the point of authority just because it was quote, or if I quote C.S. Lewis or Billy Graham or the like. I know I've already said some of these things. So I'm going to go to 1 Enoch 15, verse 8 and following, because here's an explanation for a further explanation of the logical conclusion of what happens with the sons of God and the daughters of men. The end result of the Nephilim, but they're not always called that. They're really under the rubric of a bunch of names, and of course, what happens to them when they're dead and so on. Well, First Enoch gives us its own theology, and I'm not even saying that this is correct theology. I'm saying that this is the type of cultural milieu that the New Testament writers are in. So if you would have asked somebody like one of the disciples, so what are these things that are being exorcised? They might even understand where this information came from. Oh no, it didn't come from the Old Testament. Oh no, it doesn't come from the material that we're writing, but it's from here. Is it authoritative? I guess their answer probably would be no, it's not part of the Bible, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have information in it. I'm going to stop there with that. So let me just start reading. This is 1 Enoch 15, verse 8. I'm going to continue through the rest of the chapter and then read all of 16, which is actually a very brief chapter. So I think it's an angel talking to Enoch. They're talking about the watchers, who, by the way, they're mentioned in Daniel. They're all good, and they seem to be all good in Daniel, but here they're not. So verse 8, but now the giants who are born from the union of the spirits and the flesh, that's the Genesis 6 story, shall be called evil spirits upon the earth. And remember, in the book of Mark and elsewhere, they seem to interchange the term demon and evil spirit, but there's a nuance. The term evil spirit seems to be connected to this here is what the Enoch source is. The term demon is probably more generic, meaning just a malevolent being. So anyway, now, but he says here, because their dwelling, the evil spirits, shall be upon the earth and inside the earth. Ew. Evil spirits have come out of their bodies, because from the day that they were created from the holy ones, that would be the heavenly beings, the sons of God, they became the watchers. Oh, so what are the evil spirits? They're the watchers. That's because this is now their temporary abode. They can't leave this area, evidently. Their first origin is the spiritual foundation. I guess that means that, they're spirit beings. They will become evil upon the earth and shall be called evil spirits. You just told us that. Yeah. The dwelling of the spiritual beings of heaven is heaven. But the dwelling of the spirits of the earth, which are born upon the earth, is the earth. And of course, remember, they're born on the earth. Okay. The spirits of the giants oppress each other. They will corrupt, fall, be excited, and fall upon the earth and cause sorrow. All right. And then we're told they eat no food, nor become thirsty, nor find obstacles. There was a note there about exactly what obstacles means, but I didn't bother to look at it.
That's okay, because that would be, you can look it up, because that would be my question.
And these spirits shall rise up against the children of the people and against the women, because they have proceeded forth from them. Oh, so they especially don't like women because they're, because that's their mothers? I don't know, but it's sort of weird.
Okay.
Let me finish 16, and then this will probably, then this is chapter 16. From the days of the slaughter and destruction and the death of the giants and the spiritual beings of the spirit and the flesh from which they have proceeded forth, which will corrupt without incurring judgment, they will corrupt until the day of the great conclusion, until the great age is consummated, until everything is concluded upon the watchers and the wicked ones. I'm guessing that's the day of the Lord. It's not how it's, the wordage is a little different. And so to the watchers on whose behalf you have been sent to intercede. So here's the angel telling Enoch, no, there's no intercession for them. Who were formerly in heaven, say to them, you were once in heaven, but not all the mysteries of heaven are open to you, and you only know the rejected mysteries, whatever that means. Those ones who you have broadcast to the women in the hardness of your hearts, and by those mysteries the men multiply evil deeds upon the earth. Tell them you will have no peace. And so this gives us a tiny little dissertation on where the demons come from and what their dilemma is. Chapter 19, it really does. It sort of repeats it. For example, 19:2, and there are women whom the angels have led astray. That the angels here are the heavenly beings. Will be peaceful ones. That's interesting. So I, Enoch, saw the vision of the end of everything alone, and none among the human beings will see as I have seen. That's probably a good thing. So, any questions so far, or do you want to wait?
Well, so it's saying evil spirits there. Is there a way to connect it to demon, or again, is it just that they're analogous?
I think this helps me. This informs me about when Mark uses the term interchangeably demon and evil spirit. I'm guessing this is the theological context for it. It doesn't mean it's all correct. It just means that that's what Mark is thinking about.
So that would give credence to the fact that that they're the same thing. Evil spirit and demon are the same thing, or that
yes,
a demon is an evil spirit, or an evil spirit is a demon.
Yeah, it's but I'm going to guess like anything else, it's not congruent. In other words, it's not. A demon is a generic word for a malevolent being.
So the evil spirit's like a specific one.
Is a more specific thing. In other words, are all demons evil spirits? I don't know.
So it'd be more of like, in terms of hierarchy, like demons kind of low on the totem pole, evil spirits a little bit. Not like a ranking, but
it's just a more specific term.
Okay.
Yeah, if you got your Venn diagram and it's, I don't know. I hate to try to think of an example, because when I go back and look at the examples I create when I'm
here's one to kind of ruffle people. Like, so Anunnaki seems to sometimes just be a generic,
yes,
broad term of deities.
Yes, and then sometimes it's more specific, and it's either in later periods, like I said, the Anunnaki are actually the divine beings emanating from the netherworld. And so sometimes the term Anunnaki is the catch-all phrase for all
like the pantheon.
all the pantheon, and sometimes it's a more specific group. And how do you know what's
so for
different?
demon, it's
Yes.
kind of like that.
Demons is more of a catch-all term.
Okay.
Evil spirit, at least if you read the Enoch passage, it means it's very particular. These are the beings that are the products. That they're, I guess you could say they're the dead Nephilim.
Yeah, that's what we're kind of getting from this, is they are the disembodied spirit of the Nephilim.
Now, let me throw a monkey wrench into that.
Perfect.
Let me go to Josephus for a minute. Josephus, and by the way, I use the term "by the way" too often. I find out too, but I don't know what it's better than I guess. This is Josephus, and again, as usual, he's going to tell you something about a spirit being, but it's not it's not the main topic. This is anecdotal, and I think I've told you this before. Historians love anecdotal information because it's as if I'm telling you, I'm not trying to convince you anything. I'm telling you something, and I just sort of give you this aside. And since it's not my main topic, it means it's probably really true. I'm trying to convince you of something, and while I'm doing it, I talk about the fact that, the Kansas City Chiefs lost last week, and then somebody's trying to figure out, what year this is, or he talked about the Kansas City Chiefs and they lost this game. Oh, this must be the year 2025, and or everything else I might have said was wrong. But it's sort of hard to lie about everything, I suppose. So Josephus is in his Jewish Wars, book 7, around verse 185 and following. He's talking about women. I'm not even sure whose palace this is. Maybe it's the Roman palace. No, probably a Herodian palace, I'm guessing. But he says, there's this root called the baras, and we use it for actually medical issues, but they're actually medical and demonic issues that Josephus is bringing up. He says, they dig a trench around the root till the hidden part of the root is small. Then they tie a dog to it, and when the dog tries hard to follow him that tied him, the root is easily plucked up, but the dog dies immediately. That's not very nice. As if it were instead of the man, it would take the plant away. After this, as if it were instead the man, it would take the plant away. Nor after this need anyone be afraid of taking it into their hands, this root. Yet after all this pains and getting, it is only valuable on account of one virtue it has, that if it's brought to sick persons, it quickly drives away those called demons, which are none other than the spirits of the dead. Wicked dead, by the way. In other words, if you're a wicked dead, you're wandering around moaning and complaining. And so that's the Josephus attitude, and he's first century, a little bit later than the New Testament. But the point is, he's probably a middle of the road, Jew in this regard. And so this doesn't contradict the other stuff. It just adds a more texture to the idea that demons are perhaps the spirit beings that are very specific from the product of the fall, but there also could be spirits of the dead, at least from Josephus' standpoint. So how do you know which is which? I don't know. I suppose you have to be a demon expert, if there was such a thing. So does this confuse the issue? Probably a little bit. I think I'll skip that one. Now let me go to the book of Jubilees for a minute. And I mentioned this before. This is a very important and serious work, intertestamental, that was considered important by the church for a variety of reasons, but never held to be authoritative and canonical. And so this is Book of Jubilees, chapter 5, about verse 6 and following. And this is talking about the story of Noah and the pre-Noah stuff in Genesis 6. And so it says, but Noah found grace before the eyes of the Lord. In other words, this is a commentary on Genesis 6 and against the angels whom he had sent upon the earth. That's God, I guess. He was exceedingly wroth and gave commandment to root them out of all their dominion, and he bade us to bind them into the depths of the earth. And behold, they are bound in the midst of them, and are kept separate. And against their sons went forth a command from his face that they should be smitten with the sword and be removed from under heaven. I guess this is God saying, smite all of them. And then he makes the comment, my spirit will not always abide on man, for they also are flesh, and in these days there shall be 120 years. And so this commenter is making the argument that the 120 years is actually referring to the Nephilim, that they only can be around that long, otherwise they're going to be toast. That's interesting. And he sent his sword into their midst, that each should slay his neighbor, and they began to slay each other till the day they all fell by the sword. So how did all the Nephilim get killed? In other words, there's hardly any left in the historical periods during the period of Moses. It's because they killed each other. And they were destroyed from the earth, and their fathers were witnesses of their destruction, and after this they were bound into the depths of the earth forever, until the day of the great condemnation. So this would be in a general agreement with the first Enoch source. And I guess this must be an angelic being. So our God made us bathe them all, and the chief of the spirits, his name is Mastema, and this seems to be a name for the Satan figure at some point, came and said, Lord Creator, let some of them remain before me, and let them hearken to my voice, and do all that I say unto them. For if some of them are not left with me, I won't be able to execute the power of my will on the sons of men. And you're thinking, well, that's sort of weird. But of course, you think of the Satan figure in Job, if in fact it is the adversary himself, and I'm not convinced there's an easy one-to-one correspondence there. You're thinking, God has allowed the Satan figure to have his way in the earth for whatever reason. And so here's Satan bargaining with God. If you don't allow me to have some of these demonic figures, my mission is hampered. You're thinking, well, good. But maybe this is why Jubilees didn't make the cut. This is sort of strange. For great is the wickedness of the sons of men, and God said, let the 10th part of them remain before him, and let 9 parts descend into the place of condemnation. And one of us he commanded that we should teach Noah all their medicines, for he knew that they would not walk in uprightness nor strive in righteousness. And then it continues. And if I read Jubilees chapter 10, it's pretty much repeats it. And so I don't find anything here that would be necessarily terribly useful. But so here's a Jewish writer trying to understand and explain the fact that there are still demonic beings that are causing tremendous irritation in the world, that most of them were bound, but Satan has a 10th of them that he's still dealing with. At least that's what the Jubilees text says. Of course, you're not going to get anything like this, in the Bible. And by the way, the whole idea of Satan and his fallen angels comes from a couple of passages that I don't plan to look at right now. But I think again it starts as usual with Origen. Sometimes it might be Augustine, but here Origen, who's late 2nd century, a brilliant thinker who was a pagan Greek philosopher who converted, and so and in terms of brilliance, he's probably the most articulate of the early church fathers before Augustine, and maybe even surpasses Augustine, except that he sort of went off the deep end with some of his ideas. But he's the one who looks at the passage in Isaiah 14 about the king of Babylon and son of the day star, and connects it to the Satan figure. And then he connects that to the passage in Luke 10 where Jesus says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven, which is certainly euphemism. And if Jesus is thinking of the Isaiah 34 passage, that's fine, but it doesn't mean that they're now intimately fused at the hip just because Jesus quoted that. And then you connect that to Revelation 12, where the serpent is now connected finally to Satan. Those three passages together now created the theology of the fallen angels. And my answer is it might be true, but not because you connected all these passages. But that's another story. I got a few more to look at that I thought would be interesting to look at. One is about demons from a text that is post-New Testament, by the way. It has the guise of being an ancient text because it's the Testament of Solomon. And since Solomon was so wise, in Jewish tradition, Solomon is also an exorcist, by the way. And he does lots of exorcism stuff. And so let me see if I can find it. So the Testament of Solomon, which is, by the way, I don't know, I was not terribly into the Testament of Solomon before this. And so just to find the information, it's sort of bizarre. I'm going to read just some of the isolated passages. The whole thing is really about Solomon giving us a dissertation on demons and how he works with them, etc. So here's Testament of Solomon 5:11, and Solomon is talking to a demon. In fact, he's pretty casual with them. He can talk to them and control them. And Solomon's talking first. The Testament of Solomon 5:11. I said to him, "Is there not something else for you about you, Asmodeus?" In other words, Asmodeus is sort of forced to tell Solomon some stuff about demonology. In other words, what are you guys like? What do you do? How can we defeat you? It's stuff like that. And the demon, I guess, has to tell him. I don't know. He said to me, "The power of God which binds me with unbreakable bonds by his seal knows that what I've related to you is true. I beg you, King Solomon, don't condemn me to water." Because we just can't stand. And you know why? I think I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. I think that they have an aversion to water because water's the next thing to the underworld. In other words, you go into the depths, and the underworld's under there in their cosmic geography, and so that's the last place the demons want to go, because once they get to water and they're in there, they're probably bound. I'm guessing. But here's Solomon. I smiled and replied, "As the Lord, the God of my fathers lives, you shall have irons to wear, and you shall mold clay for all the vessels of the temple, limiting the cost of the mold." I'm going to make you do all the work that other people don't have to do, and so it'll be cheaper for us. Okay, that's fascinating, Solomon. 12:1. Solomon is interrogating a bunch of demons, and there's a lot of weird ones. So 12:1. When I had worshipped the God of Israel, I ordered another demon to come forward. This time a 3-headed dragon and with an awful skin. So he had his acne, I guess, or something, appeared before me, and I asked him, "Who are you?" "Well, I'm the three-pronged spirit, one who overpowers by means of 3 deeds. In the wombs of children, I blind children. I also turn their ears around backwards and make them dumb and deaf. Finally, I also strike men against the body and make them fall down, foam at the mouth, and grind their teeth." So you think about it. If you're an exorcist in the New Testament period, a Jewish exorcist, if you see a person who's jumping up and down and foaming at the mouth and falling down, you're probably going to go to your manual here and say, "All right, now we know what type of demon it is. Now I know what I need to do," which, by the way, sounds exactly like what they do in Mesopotamia, because that doesn't, I don't know about you, but that makes me pretty uncomfortable to think that they're acting like that way. But so they probably have a manual somewhere. And this also explains, and this is a whole theology in Mesopotamia, why there are so many births that are either stillbirths or problematic births, or if they have particular infirmities. Because, of course, if you have an infirmity when you're born in the ancient Near Eastern world, that shows that the divine operatives are not happy with you for some reason. There's a one-to-one correspondence with your misfortune and your culpability. Even if you can't figure out what it is, you've got to try and figure out. That's why, of course, when Jesus is talking, I suppose it's his disciples, and they were talking about the men who fell off the scaffold and died. Who sinned, or was it a blind man or whatever? They're saying, was it them or was it his parents? And Jesus says, no, that was he had two answers in the context. One is, make sure you don't sin, or second, that was that God to be glorified, and it has nothing to do with culpability. So this is really, this just seems, rather bizarre. Two more passages in here. By the way, he interrogates lots and lots of demons. I'm not going to bore you with all the ones, he interrogates Obizuth, a female demon with disheveled hair, who in Mesopotamia, we know who she is. She's the Lamashtu, and she's the baby snatching demon who comes in. And now I have a theological reason for why, the baby didn't, make it through the birth canal. It's a baby snatching demoness who's taken the baby to come to the netherworld so she can take care of it down there. That's how they could cope in Mesopotamia. And this idea pervades the whole ancient Near East, and the Jews were not immune to it, unfortunately. So there's female demons. Let's see, chapter 18. What verse did I think was most interesting to look at? Verse 20. And Solomon is interrogating 36 heavenly bodies and learns of their activities and what thwarts them. And I thought number 20. The 16th one said, I'm called Catrax. I inflict incurable fevers on men. If anyone wants to regain health, let him pulverize coriander and rub it on his lips, saying, I adjure you by Zeus. Well, this is in Greek, of course, and so Zeus would just be the generic word for God. Retreat from the image of God, another word, so that's particular, and I retreat immediately. So in other words, he's the great Solomon, so if he collects all the demons, they are forced to give him his trade secrets. And so it's over there. By the way, this is a really interesting book. I don't believe it, but the point is, this is the cultural milieu in which the exorcistic tradition exists. You can read the rest of it; it'll just sort of curl your hair if you're actually trying to believe it.
Is some of this trying to say that this is where Solomon got some of his wisdom from?
Yes.
Yeah.
But this is bizarre, and of course it's a millennium after Solomon, and so it's not like I'm. But yes,
that's what it's insinuating. Like, okay,
yes,
these demons gave him.
So the last one is First Testament of Solomon 20, verse 12 or so. This is a demon called Ornias. I ordered Ornias to be brought before me, and I said, "Tell me, how do you know that the young man's going to die in 3 days?" Evidently, it stated something. He responded, "Well, we demons go up to the firmament of heaven, fly around among the stars, and hear the decisions which issue from God concerning the lives of men." Of course, the firmament is the rakia. It's actually a hard thing which blocks us from getting any further. So evidently, they can get that far and they can hear what's going on in the heavenly realm, but they just can't get there. How interesting of a rationale to figure this out. We fly amongst the stars, all right, and we can hear the decisions which issue from God concerning the lives of men. The rest of the time we come and are being transformed, cause destruction, whether by domination, fire, sword, or chance. So Solomon asked him, "Tell me, how you, being a demon, are able to ascend into heaven, or at least that far? Whatever things are accomplished in heaven are accomplished in the same way on earth." That's, by the way, a rule that everyone in the ancient Mediterranean world would agree with. For principalities and authorities, oh, that's interesting. That same phrases that if you're wondering whether those are malevolent beings, when Paul talks about them in Ephesians, here you go. Powers above fly around are considered worthy of entering heaven. Well, okay, so they're not always. So these are evidently good guys, but we who are demons are exhausted from not having a way station from which to ascend or in which to rest. So we fall down like leaves from the trees, and the men who are watching think that the stars are falling from heaven. That's not true, King. Rather, we fall because of our weakness, and since there's nothing on which to hold, we are dropped like flashes of lightning to the earth. We burn cities down and set fields on fire, but the stars of heaven have their foundations laid in the firmament. Okay, so our demons are spirit beings, evidently, but they are quite tied to this earthly realm, which, of course, is frustrating for them, and this is why they, cause all this problems. So this is an intellectual ascent. You're not going to get it in the Bible, of course. One last place I thought about looking at is in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we are, yes. So here on page 500, I've showed you this before. This is by Michael Wise, Martin Abig, and my colleague Edward Cook. A little bit old, it's in the early 90s, but a new translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's very convenient. You can get this whole thing online. I'm on page 526. It's text 128. The Songs of the Sage for Protection Against Evil Spirits. And by the way, this is very typical. The next thing I'll be doing will be looking at evil spirits in the ancient Near Eastern realm, and to show you how that informs our understanding of the Old Testament understanding. This is, this is an adaptation of that and a great intellectual expansion of it, which, again, informs the New Testament, but it doesn't mean it's authoritative. So this is from 4Q 510 and 511 if you're really into looking this stuff up. And so it says, and I, the instructor, proclaim his glorious splendor so as to frighten and to terrify all the spirits of the destroying angels, spirits of the bastards. That would be, of course, the Genesis 6 beings, demons, Lilith. Oh, Lilith. By the way, we're going to find out later, Lilith is a Mesopotamian demonic being, Lilitu. And in Jewish tradition, by the way, Lilith is not just a female host. She also is someone who, in one later rabbinical tradition, is Adam's first wife, oddly enough. Howlers and desert dwellers. By the way, in Isaiah, we have a passage which I'll look at later where it talks about these howling creatures. And yes, you can simply call them coyotes or wolves or whatever, but in the context of the ancient Near East and even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're demonic beings. In other words, that means it's a demonic host that is taken on the form or is possessed. So in other words, not all coyotes are, demons, but the ones that are out in the desert that are scaring the bejeebies out of me, they are. And so you can de-demonize them if you want from the book of Isaiah and elsewhere, but I think you're doing it at your intellectual peril. That's not what's going on here. So this, I think, sort of confirms that that when the book of Isaiah and other places talk about these desert creatures, they're more than just desert creatures for them. And those which fall upon men without warning to lead them astray from the spirit of understanding and to make their heart and their brokens, text is broken, desolate during the present dominion of wickedness and predetermined times of humiliation. So that's a piece of a text. Then on page 529, a fragment. By the way, this text is heavily fragmented, like most Dead Sea Scrolls are, because of, after all, it's papyrus. So in the counsel of God broken, his knowledge he put into my heart, meaning God, the praises of his righteousness, and by his mouth he frightens all the spirits of the bastards, the same phrase, to subdue broken uncleanness. For in the filth of my flesh is the foundation of something. The statutes of God are in my heart, and I profit from all the wonders of humankind. The works of guilt I condemn. And so, but he has an understanding of demonology here. This would almost be like like Solomon. So just looking at that again, we're going to find out from Mesopotamia that this is a way to when you do exorcisms in Mesopotamia, they're often poetic, which means they're probably singing it. And you think about it, what an incantation is. An incantation is a singing of something. It's the word chant, and of canto, of course, in Latin traditions, that's the word to sing. So now, how do I summarize all this from the intertestamental period? I'm not sure I can summarize it easily, except to say that the catchword demon that is used in the Septuagint, which I have not talked about, the translation of the Old Testament, but in New Testament texts and elsewhere, are certainly talking about some sort of malevolent beings. To be specific, certainly the spirit beings, the spirit of the bastards, as they're called in the Dead Sea Scrolls, or the unclean spirit, New Testament and Enoch and Jubilees, certainly these are what you would call demons. In fact, the word is interchangeable with the term demon by Mark. But again, this provides a context for understanding them. Then, of course, you got something like Josephus, who says that no, these are spirit beings that are spirits of the dead. That's not contradicting them. I think that means that the semantic range of the word is wider than we're comfortable with, I suppose. And so they're certainly spirit beings. They're usually malevolent spirit beings. But of course, I'm going to throw a monkey wrench into that when we get into the Old Testament. So this is what I got for intertestamental stuff before we venture into the Near East and Old Testament. So you probably got a host of questions that I can't answer, but
yeah, I'm just waiting for the I don't knows. But so at least and I'll try my best to stay on topic from like the sources we've looked at today.
Me too.
But so essentially, again, it's not canonical, everything that you read, but their understanding is that demons are not a one-size-fits-all in terms of where they came from. Like, they can be multiple things.
Yeah.
But we do see clearly they are the dead spirits of the Nephilim, or as high, like the Rephaim, from some of the material. Like their understanding would be that would be one of the answers.
And just one little spoiler for the Rephaim, that term has more than one meaning, which are not necessarily semantically connected. The Rephaim are the giants, we're descendants of the giants, but they're also a term for dead spirits, and especially at the city of Ugarit, the Canaanite city in the coast, talks about them, and it's also the word for healers. And so we got all sorts of confusing stuff. But I think that the Pentateuch writers there understand all of that. And so when they use the term Rephaim, you got to look at the context to know, are we talking about spirits of the dead? Are we talking about the giants? Which, by the way, they're not exclusive. They can be the same. And sometimes they're a word for the healers, although it's certainly malevolent. So,
yeah. Because then another point, and maybe this connection shouldn't be made. So the usage of unclean spirit and demon, in the times where they're the same, then we look at, okay, why is it called unclean spirit? Well, if we're going to try to define unclean, one of the main ways of something being unclean when we look at the Levitical law would be an improper mixture, which would that not give credence to the fact that it is at least probably alluding to the Rephaim or the dead Nephilim, because that's an improper mixture that never should have happened. That's an unclean spirit.
I think that would be a reasonable assertion. I wouldn't go any further with it. I know Mike Heiser develops that further. The only reason I'm not comfortable with doing that is because I haven't developed it further yet, and so I probably need to go into it. And like I said, I usually agree with him, and so it's not like I'm disagreeing with him. I just haven't gotten there yet. But I would say that it's obviously a little more serious than an impure mixture of clothing. But yeah. Now, is it the same terminology, impure, that is used later on? We're using a translation now in Greek, and so I haven't studied that to see whether or not what the word is that they're using and how it informs us about the Levitical stuff. That's always problematic, and it's, when you're looking at even the Septuagint, when it translates the Old Testament, it's helping me understand what they're thinking, and it even helps me inform maybe even what manuscript they're using, but I don't know.
Okay, and then the next one would be about the combination of exorcisms and medical procedures, or medical issues, because a lot of what you read talks about either a rationale for a medical purpose, and so even what we looked at in the past episodes, is there a differentiator or a difference between demon activity and medical, and do we see that throughout the New Testament and in tradition? Because I think one argument that people make is, well, no, there's not demon activity anymore. This was just their explanation, and they didn't know what to do with mental illness and other medical diseases and effects, and so their rationale was, it's a demon, and so then everything is demonic. And I would argue that even today, people who are of the charismatic ascent still hold to every single thing is medical, or every single medical thing is demon activity. And so based on tradition and sources, do we see in the Bible too where they differentiate at all?
You're going to love this. Yes and no. The answer is somewhere in between yes and no. So let me answer it by, though I haven't gone into the ancient Near Eastern world yet, if you have so this is ancient medicine, which I would like to address, although we're going to be looking at it from a different standpoint. Today, Keegan calls me up, hey, we can't do a podcast today. I got a terrible cold. Though I'm a believer, of course, I'm also part of the scientific revolution. So I'm thinking, hey, buddy, you probably ought to deal with your cold, And if I said so, and what it would probably be a little strange, at least with traditional Christianity, if I said what demonic host has got you. You know what I'm saying is that now I'm not. By the way, I'm not saying that that's not possible. I'm simply saying that that's probably not the first place I'm going to go. Go take care of your cold and we'll do it. Or if I said, well, what did you do wrong to get the cold? Now, maybe you knew your little boy had a cold and you knew it, but you couldn't, you still had to kiss him. You couldn't stand it. And so I know how I got my cold. Or maybe you had a moral, problem that causes this. But in the ancient Near East, this is obviously pre-scientific revolution, where the spiritual realm and the earthly realm mingle together. I wouldn't say indiscriminately, but they mingle together in a way that when you have a cold, there's a twofold answer to your problem. Yes, there's a natural reason. So and by the way, Babylonian medicine is really sophisticated, and it comes right up to Hippocrates, and there's a whole lot of stuff that Hippocrates does that is pretty obvious now that Hippocrates wasn't working in a vacuum, and of course Hippocrates is really, maybe his contribution is he tries to de-emphasize the spiritual realm. He doesn't remove it, by the way. He de-emphasizes it, and of course it appeals to our modern sensibilities when we like to read the Socrates stuff to only look at his naturalistic explanations and ignore all the other stuff that we're uncomfortable with. But the ancient person, I could look at your problem and give you a remedy. It's probably herbal. There's all sorts of things that I'll do, but I'll look at my bag of tricks and I'll say, all right, it's got this, you got this problem. Tell me again, you've got a redness in your throat. What color is the pus? And just all this stuff. I mean, they're going to look at it, and I'm going to look at my manual. I'm an Azu. which is just a regular doctor. By the way, you probably wouldn't want a physician to come and cut up your body in Mesopotamia, but I'm going to be looking at it. But if your issue, but I'm probably going to ask you some other questions that you wouldn't expect a doctor to ask, and it might be something like, so did you pay your temple tax? I know that you're one of the local deities that you worship is Ishtar. I mean, have you been doing what Ishtar wants? And of course, usually it's like, I had no idea that I was, in other words, I wonder if there's something that you are not doing, because the symptoms that you're telling me are probably demonic. In other words, there's a physical issue, and if you go ahead and take care of the physical issue, that's probably not going to get rid of your problem, because it means that somebody is accosting you either because you're vulnerable, because you're just human, you forgot to do. In other words, you have an involuntary sin, so you forgot to do something. And by the way, the gods don't always tell you what they want. And sometimes they tell you what they want by by allowing a demonic host to come and bother you. And then now the Azu, who might also be an Ashipu priest, which is a witch doctor. And by the way, witch doctors and doctors, their positions they overlap. We want them to be separate, but because of our modern sensibilities, but they weren't in the ancient world. And I think even in Israel, in many respects, the Ashipu priest, who's usually superior, says, we got to deal with the spiritual issue first. So, and so I'm going to read out of Joanne Scurlock's book on medicine in the next podcast. And there are dozens upon dozens of texts where it'll talk about a particular medical infirmity and then tell you this is the hand of Shupaleya or Adat Lili, or the hand of a god or whatever. In other words, clearly this particular issue is a spiritual issue that is demonic, but not all of them. In fact, if I were to look through her medical text and see how many infirmities do not have a demonic conclusion to it, I would say it's probably pretty high. In other words, most physical problems are not, it's the spectacular ones or they're the ones that are demonic. And so when I say demonic, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a single spirit being bothering you. It just means that either a lower class spirit being is usually coming to you at the behest of a high god, because the high god, of course, is too busy to deal with you. And so in the New Testament, I think it's the same type of world. And so sometimes Jesus deals with someone and it's clearly 100% a medical issue. And of course, you think about it, Jesus transcends all of this. Jesus isn't going to say, well, more important than any of that is the fact that he's actually not an exorcist. An exorcist is somebody who uses all these formulas, etc., and he reads the manual and he just says, get out, and I think it's this fellow who brought up John Hull's Hellenistic Magic, written 50 years ago. I think he's the one that made the observation that Jesus will come up to somebody who's sick and blind, let's say, and he'll touch them and deal with them. And every time he does it, it's different. But if the person is a demon, he doesn't come up and touch them until after the unclean spirit has been dealt with. And so I suppose it would be easy and maybe even comforting for us that are post-scientific revolution to look at all this and say, yeah, it's, somebody has a demon, it's probably just mental illness or this or that. And it's not an either or thing, but clearly that's not the mindset of the writers. If I look at it from the context of the Greco-Roman Hellenistic period, That's not what they're thinking. They don't separate stuff out like that. So sometimes, they would look at it and say, yeah, you've got this mental illness, and I don't know how you got it, but I don't see any reason why it's demonic, because it doesn't fit the mold in my textbook that I have here. It's not described. So yeah, it's probably just natural.
So again, it's one of those, you just got to live in the tension of, it's not
Yep.
black and white. Sometimes it is meant, sometimes it is an illness, sometimes it's the combination of the two.
Yeah. And does that happen today? Well, I just had a brief discussion about it before, but just go outside the modern Western world, you find it, but if it's still here too. Just look at a book like by Craig Keener, who's talked about miracles, etc., in one of his books, an unbelievably scholarly book, hundreds of thousands of footnotes about this, by one of the best of all pointy-headed scholars, to look at to look at activity, and so it's not just them out there, way out there in desolate, central, wherever you want to go, Borneo or whatever, the farthest reach of the world. It could be here too.
Yeah.
And sometimes perhaps we don't see it because we're not looking. I don't know.
Yeah. Which again makes sense, right? We live in a physical world,
Yeah.
but there's clearly a supernatural, spiritual world going on around us. You can't separate the two. And even like what you're saying about, because we have modern medicine, which is obviously phenomenal for cases that are just actual illness. But even that, it's not so different when you get in terms of like Advil or Tylenol, right? Like, here's this remedy. If this happens, take this.
Yeah.
Like, it's not crazy different. Now, not saying that the ancients were always right on, oh, you got this skin disease, try this, eat this rock or whatever they said.
Well, they're actually, a lot of it is pretty reasonable, especially the naturalistic medicine that's herbal. They probably had a lot of trial and error. And by the way, it probably goes back to prehistoric times. We got really, really early medical texts from Mesopotamia that even when they're written, you can sort of tell they probably did trial and error. Oh, you got this sickness. I got this plant. Let's see if it works. Oh, it didn't work. Sorry. Let's try that. They did trial and error, just like we still, like modern medicine has to do that too. I just don't want them to try it on me, but and now to the other extreme, this certainly would inform you that every time somebody's sick in the New Testament, it's not a demon. In other words, you can't find a demon at every point. There's not a demon of lying, and not a demon of frustration or whatever you want to call it. That just seems to go the opposite direction of it.
Yeah. Which is, again, yeah, like you said, it's tough for Westerners because we want either or. But
yeah,
but it seems as though there's this hodgepodge of possibilities. Just medical, just demonic, and oftentimes it's like with anything in life. If we just look at our sin, what the enemy is not going to use our weak points to try to press in and hurt. Okay, so now take it to the medical. Oh, Satan just says, nope, hands off. It's medical. I can't try to wiggle my way and touch that weakness or brokenness. But in the New Testament, yeah, you have times where it's a combination, right? You have the epileptic.
Yeah.
Well, you see, epilepsy is a medical thing, but also brought on by demons. So it's both. But then other times you have Jesus just healing. Okay, you were lame. He doesn't say anything besides, you can't walk. Stand up and walk, and he heals them.
Interesting you bring up epilepsy, because, of course, for the both in the ancient Near East and in the Greek and Roman world, epilepsy, because, of course, it sort of came on without any announcement. Clearly, it was something very intimidating, and I would be intimidated by somebody who was an epileptic, because that clearly is some sort of spirit being, not necessarily always malevolent. And so it's like, when is this going to happen? And in fact, that was sometimes epilepsy was used as a confirmation when you went into a mystery religion. If you had some sort of, in other words, what's the proof that there's the divine being is now resides in me? It's now I'm doing things that I don't normally do. And so for them, that was pretty obvious that they're, think about it. When you have a cold, you can still function normally in society. But if you have epilepsy, now you're doing things that are, well, what are they? Involuntary. You're doing things that that human beings normally either wouldn't do or can't stop doing. And so so that they certainly saw that as something that was supernatural, outside of the realm of the natural.
Those manifestation type
Yes.
things.
And so, yeah, of course we can give medical explanations for them, but that doesn't, it's not an either or issue, especially for the ancients.
Yeah, because even Paul talks about having some type of infirmity or something that he doesn't even get healed of.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course he doesn't, I mean, that's been argued for 2,000
What
years.
the thorn is?
What is that thorn, et cetera? Is it simply medical? Is it spiritual or whatever? And think about it. Even when Jesus says, that Satan has deceived you or whatever to Peter or whatever, well, what does that mean? Is that demonic activity? I suppose you could argue that means that there's a spiritual being that is hampering your ability. And of course, some of you who are old enough are going to remember Flip Wilson and his variety TV show in the 70s, and he was always irritating his guests, etc. And when he would do something, he would say, "Oh, the devil made me do it." And of course, everyone back then knew exactly what he was talking about. He said, it wasn't me. It was something outside of me that forced me. And I've had some people even tell me when they did some harm to me, "I'm sorry, that was the devil." I'm thinking, yeah, really? I mean, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like, it sounds like you might have been a part of that too.
Yeah.
We use it sometimes as an excuse.
I had one. Oh, Peter.
Oh, yes. Peter, get behind thee, Satan. Satan.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, then you're getting into a discussion of what modern Christians, they talk about, well, possession versus oppression. And it's like, well, obviously there's still a spiritual real world going on. But then that alludes kind of to Job, right? That stuff was obviously brought on by a demonic spiritual, his boils, even the medical stuff was not just a simple medical case. That was brought on by spiritual things.
So even with Job, it means that ultimately everything that happens to you, it has a divine referent to it. And so for them, all we're doing is talking about whether we can see the specific cause or the general cause. So all things come from God. He's permitted this demonic host to bother you. Sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's indirect. And so that doesn't really help me explain anything. It's that we like to just separate them out completely. That's, in a sense, we're functional deists in this culture, where we sort of first gravitate towards the natural response to something. And of course, what does deism think about God? Yes, there's a God, but God is not particularly intimate with his creation. He is only he made creation, and now he's allowing creation to run on its own, and he doesn't play an intimate role in the daily affairs of humans. And that's the scientific revolution. And of course, they got further and further and further away from God. And so, of course, but the other result is problematic too, where I see a spiritual reason for everything that happens to be, and then I sort of lose track of the physical world.
Yeah.
Oh, I lost my car keys. Who's accosting me? No, I was stupid. I lost my keys.
No, but I would say then that gets into a deeper issue, which is just, again, we have to swim in the tension, and us moderns and us Christians, we want, which is probably no different than the ancients sometimes, which is, just tell me what to do. I just want to know black and white. We don't want there to be this like nebulous of things, which is just not what it boils down to with God. Even the same way that God called Abraham, the same way Jesus calls his disciples and calls us, which is, okay, what do you want me to do? Follow me. We don't get all the answers. Abraham doesn't get all the answers. The disciples don't get all their answers right away. And I mean, obviously, God does along our walk he tells us what to do, and he commands us. But on many things, it boils down to a relationship with God, which requires some actual active will and listening and talking and the building of that relationship to be like, well, tell me what to do in this situation. And that goes into, I know we talked about tattoos, but it goes into what would be considered right and left-handed issues. Well, this issue is a sin for me and not for you, but we don't like that because I think to the outside perspective, it's, well, then people can just say whatever they want. And it's like, yeah, on the outside, it might appear that it is, what's the word I'm looking for? What's the word I'm looking for, Mark? You're smart. Not just like opinion, but like, what you say this, I say that. Subjective.
Yes.
It can appear on the outside that it's like just the subjective thing, but I think that's just diminishing the actual spiritual relationship that's going on once you have the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, walking with God, that it's not a passive thing. It takes active and proactive relationship with us walking and being more transformed into his image. But we don't, we don't want, which is why I think sometimes as the church, we try to diminish these spiritual things. Well, no, there's no demonic activity. Well, and if there is, well, then tell me what to do at each situation. And it's like, no, it takes, exactly. There's some unanswered things that are seemingly left up into the air, and you gotta go to God and you gotta figure it out. And it takes active relationship and pursuit on our part as well.
And I think you brought it up. We talked about this with tattoos. In my second discussion about tattoos, I talked about the whole issue of the Old Testament and the legal code, and then, of course, Christ's law of love. And I said, so how do I know which ones to apply? It's when that circumstances arrives. It might look subjective to the outside, but if you're always implementing love, which is the core of the two commandments Jesus mentions, the love God and love your neighbor. If you're implementing those, then everything else, I wouldn't say it melts away. It means that now everything that I do is under that context. But if you're asking, well, just tell me what to do. No, just love. Wait a minute, that's not, but how do I know what to do? Well, you won't know it until the situation. And if you're using love and wisdom, in all these things, if you're also connecting with me, then you're going to do right.
Yeah.
But I want, and like I said before, I think every ethnic group that attached itself to Christianity, that one of the first things they did was to try to implement some sort of, legal system superimposed upon it. And it was always a tension. And of course, like I said before, we need laws, but that's a different issue. So it's the same thing here. How do I know what to do, or how do I interpret this? No, we have to live with the tension. We're just mortal human beings. My goal is not to resolve issues for you. It's to provide a context for understanding them better, and then realizing, we really don't know such and such.
Which should be, that tension should be seen as beautiful, because it puts the onus on the personal intimacy of your relationship with Christ, which is obviously, and then we don't like stuff like that. I think we don't like tension because we would look at it and say the unbeliever, even what I just said, can go and run with it. Well, that's my relationship with Jesus, and I can just do whatever I want. And it's like, but then the onus is on them, whether or not they're really following Jesus. But for the true believer who's been born again, that's a beautiful thing. We see and even on this thing of demons and healing, we see Jesus do that. Like you said, every time he goes up to somebody and heals, it's seemingly different. When he tells them not, you throw the first stone, and then he writes in the sand. It's like, so he spits and makes mud pies and throws them at him. And it's like, because each one is different and intimate, and only God knows. Like, well, why that way? Well, because he's God.
Yes.
Yeah, so just a couple more. And this one I've been wanting to ask for the last couple episodes.
No, I'm already.
And we're drifting a little bit away from this, but it's the water, the aversion to water, and whether or not these demons have to have an abode.
All I can do is tell you what I read. Like I said, I'm giving you some of these anecdotal pieces of information. So I think it would be, I don't know if I want to say the word silly to sit there and say, I know exactly what their problem is. But I know some people do that. And I'm thinking, where do you get your information? Do I know demons don't like water? Well, there's an anecdotal piece of information in Matthew. There's a note that I just read out of the Testament of Solomon, and I've given you my educated guess as to why they wouldn't like water. Why do they jump? Why do the pigs jump into the water? I'm guessing it's probably not them deciding that, but the point is that this gives a rational explanation for it. Although maybe you should say super rational explanation for it, that they're closer to the place of their confinement. But I don't know. I mean,
does any of it have to do with the original curse on the serpent, right? The eating of dust and their cosmic geography of like the desert, dry places?
Could be.
You're not going to give me anything extra?
I think maybe you could write a nice book about it and get on the New York Times bestseller list. Although maybe somebody already has. I don't know, but
that'd be like a 4-sentence book. Demons don't like water. The serpent was cursed to the dust.
Yeah. Stranger interconnections, have been made. That's all I can say.
Yeah, but I don't want to make connections that are made up connections. But then going off of that in the New Testament, when we have that, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but those couple verses where Jesus talks about like a demon leaves, and then the house is kind of picked up, but the demon returns and finds the house tidy, and says, "Yo, this is Keeganese. Yo, I'm gonna bring 7 of my friends with that are worse than me." What the heck? Like, what is that trying to teach or tell?
I don't know, because it's a parable, so it clearly is not teaching you about demonology. It's using that as an example. And, if I give you a hunting metaphor, and in 5,000 years there are no longer any hunters and they don't even know what hunting is, and if they basically create their whole understanding of what hunting is based upon my metaphor that I just used, they'd be in trouble. And by the way, I'm not comparing myself to Jesus using a metaphor at all. But the point is the goal of his metaphor, the goal of his use of demons there is not to explain what happens to someone. In fact, I don't even remember what the context of the parable is, but demons aren't the purpose of the story, or not story, parable. So I don't want to create my theology of demons based upon that. So I don't know what it means. It might, if I basically bit the bullet and just read through the whole Testament of Solomon, I probably would find out something like that, because I think it tries to answer every question you might have. We got an answer for you. Don't worry. It's all here.
Yeah. And this one's very Keegan to me. Thanks, ADD. The one I left out, which when we were looking at like the actual healings. So in the Old Testament, you'd brought it up in the previous episode about the one leper, and he's told, "Well, go take a bath."
Naaman, yes.
Is that more to do with like, no, actually, like you just need to go clean off, or is that the ritual?
Oh, it's not a ritual. That's the whole point. That's why Naaman is furious, is because he's being told to do this rather mundane thing rather than perform some sort of detailed ritual.
Yeah, because I'm just wondering if that's like a case of like, no, like that's going to just be the normative way to heal you. You just need it.
No, it's still supernatural, because God is, because this is what God told him to do. And
so God's basically showing himself strong by saying, no, we're not doing all that song and dance.
And so instead he's having him do a mundane thing which God is going to use to heal him. Because normally you don't heal leprosy by going to take a bath, from what I hear.
Yeah.
And of course, we don't even know what type of leprosy the guy has, but what type of skin disease it is, because it's a pretty generic term. But so he's healed supernaturally through a mundane thing. And maybe the next day, if Naaman came by, he would have been told, just rub all this dirt on you. I mean, I don't know. That's my guess. I haven't studied it carefully, and so from that angle, and so maybe there's something I'm missing, which I wouldn't shock me. By the way,
wouldn't shock me at all, not in the slightest. So to end this episode, before we go into the next one about looking at the ancient Near East, would be from what we've looked at in terms of the rituals and the things that they do, and we're going to look at that more in the next episode, but what differentiates what we see Jesus do in his exorcising of demons, namely the way he can do it from a distance, right? He can do it over Wi-Fi, and he can do it like personally. Again, not touching them, but he can cast them out. But the way he does it, he says, "I command you, get out," and just the power. So can you talk a little bit just about that, like the authority that we see in Jesus compared to what the world was used to?
I think it shows it's really no different than everything else that happens with Jesus, is that if you're wondering who this guy is, even if I didn't tell you that he's the Holy Son of God, you would figure it out, because who else could do this? This is not a normal man. It's not even a normal heavenly being. If you can basically cause somebody to be raised from the dead from a distance, extract a demon from a distance, think how hard it is. And by the way, Hull makes the argument in his book that when you look at, there's tons of stuff on exorcism in the pagan world, the Greco-Roman world, magical papyri from the ancient Near East, etc. But you know how many actual examples there are of a real live exorcism? Almost all of them are Jesus. The other ones are telling you how to do that, but they don't give you a case study. They just say, all right, here's the manual. This is how you do this, this, and this. And, when we have a 96%, success, none of that occurs. And so their argument is that Jesus is very, very different, because first of all, he transcends all of this stuff. He doesn't use any of it any more than when God wants to perform miracles through Moses. He just, whatever Moses has, you got your stick, we'll use a stick. And so if he had an iPhone, he'd be the iPhone, or whatever he had. But, and so Jesus is not, he's something, his actions and clearly he must transcend all of this. He wants the weather to stop. He just tells it to stop. Any other person in the ancient world, if they thought they could do that, they would have to go through formulas and bargain with deities or whatever to allow for this to happen. But he does it as if it's his own authority, and the only one who can do that is God. And so he's basically, what he's doing is he's wedging you in to the point of, by the end of the book, you must be thinking, this guy must be himself. But that doesn't fit well with my Jewish theology. If I'm, or any theology, you think about it, the incarnation is so bizarre from an intellectual standpoint. You know what the pagans said about that? Why would God condescend to take on it's one thing for God to come down and temporarily take on flesh so I can talk with you. It's another for him to actually take on the nature, because you think about it, and that was what the church struggled with, is, all right, what does Christ have? Is he got two natures? Is he 100% human, 100% divine? Is it a mingling of the two? And they came to the conclusion it was the first one, that he had two full, complete, and separate natures, but somehow they were put together in the person of Christ. And so, for example, when the Catholic Church argues that Mary was the mother of God, that no, wait, no. Jesus is God, but his human nature is what came out of the woman. Well, did he have a divine? Well, yes, okay, but she's not the mother of the divine nature. How does that work? And so, Protestants especially, and Jews, of course, would have struggled with that. And of course, I know Mike Heiser talks about the whole two Yahweh issue. And though I'm familiar with it and I'm happy with it, it's a really hard nut to crack. And I understand where he's coming from, but I can see where there's been such pushback in the Christian world trying to figure that out. But the whole issue of incarnation is it's counterintuitive. Does that, but the ancients, again, the pagans argue, well, what, so God takes on human flesh, that would be wrong. Why would he, if flesh is corruptible and the universe is corruptible, why would God condescend to put himself in that circumstance? And of course the Christians is screaming, yes, that's the whole point. He's doing that. And why would he do that? That's the whole point of our existence, is that why would you do that for me? And that should send chills down our spines. Like, what?
Yeah. It's like the problem and the question that it raises for the world. The Christians are the ones standing there waving their hands saying, that's your problem with it is the beauty of it.
And as we're doing in our church, going through Hebrews, the whole point, and this is something that is not explained to us, but we're sort of given a hint both by Paul in Romans and in the book of Hebrews, is that Christ, that God had to become human flesh in order to, he had to take on human flesh to be a sin bearer for human flesh. So I don't know how that works. It kind of makes sense, but he couldn't do it from his heavenly abode. He couldn't become an angel or whatever. He's got to become part of that. I don't know how that works. Maybe there's a divine decree or law that we're not privy to. And something, it's probably good that we're not privy to it.
Yeah, we couldn't handle it.
Yeah, we
can't even handle the little bit we do have.
I can't even handle the book of Hebrews when it says so many things. It's so otherworldly.
Well, very cool. Well, yeah, we'll stop there. And I bet we'll have at least for sure one more episode on demons, potentially two. But the next one we're going to look at the ancient world, the ancient Near East, and what the Mesopotamian and Middle Eastern cultures are doing with this demon stuff,
and how that informs my understanding of the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm. And then we'll probably look at that one little chapter you've been talking about.
1 Samuel 28, but also which is of course Saul having the she's not a witch, she's actually a ghost mistress. That's literally what the term is. Calling Samuel up from the dead. What does that mean? Because that's really uncomfortable. Doesn't fit my theology very well, by the way. Not my nice traditional. I was traditionally raised in a good conservative Presbyterian environment. That doesn't fit very well. And how about your lying spirit in 1 Kings 22? It's coming from God. They don't look like they're malevolent in the sense. So we'll have to discuss that. And as usual, we won't come to any easy conclusion. But
we'll bring the topic up.
Have to. It's there.
And then talk for an hour, and then get to the end and say, I don't know.
Yeah. And I know some of you are bothered by that. It's my method, I hope.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thank you again. As always, thank you for tuning in and watching. Like, subscribe, comment, all that fun stuff. We got some links below if you want to email us or just drop it in the normal questions, and we'd be happy to respond to you. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on the Buried Bible Podcast.
Be well.